Hey, well, happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to the Friday Lunch and Learn sponsored by the Do Space. My name is Julie, and I'll be your facilitator this afternoon. Today, we're going to be talking about Excel pivot tables at the entry level. If you have any questions, I will put the chat up over here on another monitor. So feel free to ask any questions that you might have. If you think of something after the fact, you can always email me at jdospace@gmail.com. So if you haven't used a pivot table before, I just want to talk a little bit about what we're going to be looking at today. So our objectives for today are to understand data organization and the sources that are appropriate for the use with pivot tables. To be able to use basic pivot table techniques for data exploration, and to look at pivot table techniques for data presentation. So in other words, pivot charts. So a pivot table has a lot of built-in functionalities. It will automatically summarize, sort, organize, group, count, total, average data. It will pull minimum data, maximum data. It has some built-in calculations. You can always develop your own calculations as well, and we'll be doing that throughout the month as we move through our pivot table series. So when you think about a pivot tables are extremely interactive, they're dynamic, and they're user-friendly. Once you understand how to utilize the pivot table, utilize the various fields, you can use them at a very entry level or a very complex level. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. I have my first pivot table that I'm going to bring up. This is the data that we're going to use for our activity today. If time prevails, I will show you, I do want to talk a little bit about organizing your data in a manner so that pivot tables can be utilized in Microsoft Excel and some of the other higher end functionalities of Microsoft Excel. Just double check here. Wanted to make sure I was recording. So what we have here is some basic data. We have 4 different fields. We have the salesperson, we have the region, we have the order amount, and the month. For our salespeople, I think we have 9 or 10 salespeople and only about 40 lines of data. So we're not dealing with a lot of data, but for an entry level, I think it's a little bit easier to comprehend the pivot tables or anything in Excel without having hundreds or thousands of lines of data to deal with. So when you start to put in a pivot table, the first thing that you want to do, anytime that you have a data array, such as this one, the first thing that you want to do is move to the insert ribbon. And on the insert ribbon over to the right, you have a couple of different options. You can insert a pivot table and you can insert a table. Before we insert our pivot table, we're going to create a table out of this data. And regardless of whether you're using a pivot table or lookup tables, index matches, whatever the case may be, you want to create a table out of this data. I'm just going to zoom this a little bit so it's easier for you to see at home. In order to do that, on the insert ribbon, underneath the tables grouping, you are going to find the table. Now, to create a table out of this data from A1 down to D40, you can either select all of the data if you would like to. You don't necessarily have to. You can select that by clicking in A1 and pulling all the way down to D40. However, that can be a little time consuming, not so much in this case because we don't have a lot of data, but keep in mind that to select data, you can do the Control Shift and the down arrow. So that went down to line 40. It stopped because it found a blank line, okay? And then I'm just going to use the right arrow and it went over to column D and it stopped because it found a blank column. So anytime that you are putting data together, you want to keep in mind that it might look a little bit nicer if you put in lines in between, but it will also stop you from performing some of these higher end functions in Microsoft Excel. So as I was saying, you do not have to necessarily select everything. You can just select a cell within the data array. And then you're going to come up to table and click on table. What that did was it selected from A1 to D40. And I know that this is very small. There's no way for me to enlarge it. So that's just that's the window that Microsoft Excel provides for us when we insert a table. So it says, where's the data in your table? And it has selected from A1 to D40. You might note that it automatically put in the absolute reference for us. So we do not have to do that. And it also has a check mark in my table has headers, which we do want because our headers are the salesperson, the field, the amount, or the order amount, and the field. So we're ready to go. As soon as I click on OK, it's going to populate another ribbon. So here is our table design ribbon. Now there's lots of stuff that we can do in here. You can change the table style if you want to. We're just going to leave it the way that it is. What we want to focus on right now is renaming the table. So if I come all the way over here to the left, it says table 1. We want to make sure that we rename that table and rename it something that you are going to remember, or that if you're sharing this with other people, that your team is going to recognize. So I'm just going to call this our Q1 data. Now, if you're wondering why I call it Q1 data, if you look over in column D, it does the only months that are represented in this particular year to date are January, February, and March. So depending on your employer, it could be Q1, it could be Q3. I'm just going to call it Q1. And we have renamed our table. Now, tables is something new to you. I always suggest to folks that you go to your name box. So right now I'm in cell A1. That's why A1 is represented in the name box. But if I click on the down arrow, you can see that it says Q1 data. And if I select Q1 data, it will highlight that information. It will show you a list of all of the tables within your workbook. All right, so if you have multiple tables inside your workbook, even if you're not on that worksheet, it will give them to you in this drop down. So we just have one table, and that's all that we need for right now. And we are going to go ahead, now that we have our table, we're going to go ahead and we're going to move back to the insert ribbon, and we're going to insert a pivot table. So when I go to insert the pivot table, I'm just going to click on pivot table. It populates this window. It's slightly bigger than the last one that we looked at. And it says select a table or range. You'll note that in my table or range, it says Q1 data. So it picked up not the cell data array, but the table data array with the table name. If you didn't rename yours, it would say table 1. If you didn't insert a table, it would say the A1:D40 with the absolute reference applied. And we're going to talk about why it's a time saver for you to create the table. And I'm just going to show you one instance as to why this will assist you with being more proficient with your pivot tables. Down below that, it has the radio button in new worksheet. We do want to leave that there because I don't want to insert it on the existing worksheet. So we're going to have the pivot table have a standalone worksheet for it. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on OK. And this is what you're going to see. So let's take a look at what's happened here. Up at the top, you have your pivot table ribbons. So you have pivot table analyze, and you have a design ribbon specifically for the pivot table, okay? If I were to move back to pivot table and click inside, I have a table design, but this is specifically for my table. On sheet 1, which is my pivot table, I have a design ribbon that is specifically for the pivot table. You see that there's some different options in here. So on the pivot table analyze, we'll talk about some of these options today. Some of them we will look at moving forward throughout the month as we talk about pivot tables. Over here on the left-hand side, we have our work area. And there's nothing represented yet because we have not selected any data for the pivot table to analyze. You'll notice over here on the right, we have our pivot table fields. We have salesperson, region, order amount, and month. That should sound familiar to you. If I come over here to pivot table data, there are those 4 fields again. And if I were to add to my table array, it would add that field in my pivot table. But we have 4 fields, and down below we have 4 different areas, or quadrants is what I call them. One for filters, one to arrange information in columns, one to arrange information in rows, and one to look at those values. So earlier when I was showing you my PowerPoint introduction, I was talking about how there are built-in analytics in the pivot table. Excuse me, I almost said power pivot. The sum, the min, the average, the count. There's about, it depends on what version of Microsoft Excel you're running. There's between 9 and 11 that built-in functions that you can automatically have the pivot table analyze the data for you. And you can also come up here, we're not going to do this today, but just to give you a little hint as to what we'll be doing again throughout the month of February, we can analyze or create our own calculations if there's something specific that you want to analyze that is not available in the pivot table analyze. Okay, so how does this work? How do I get the information to show over here? If I want to, let's say I want my salespeople. So I'm going to put a check mark in salesperson. And let me blow this up a little bit. Okay, so I put a check mark in salesperson. It automatically put it down here in rows. Okay. If you don't want it in rows, maybe you want your salespeople to be listed across in the columns. You can drag and drop this field to columns, and it will put them in a column reference. However, personally, mine does not work that way. So I like them in the rows, but you can force them to go into one of these other sections if you would like to. Now, what's so special about the pivot tables? When I first learned about a pivot table, and this is the honest truth, I didn't know anything about pivot tables, and somebody that I work with called me and said, "Will you help me out? I'm having problems with my pivot table." And somehow or another, I went into Zach's office and I clicked on a couple of things and it worked. I have no idea. And I'm walking back to my office and I'm thinking, wait a second. If you can do that with a pivot table, why am I going to all this other work with this data that I work with? I'll show you what I was doing, and then I'll show you how quickly the pivot table can analyze the data for you. So, and this was not the data, by the way, but let's just say that I wanted to have a subtotal of each one of my salespeople. This was the approach that I was taking. I would insert a row, and then I would do my subtotal for each person. Now, we only have, what I say, 9 or 10 different salespeople. I was dealing with hundreds of people, so I was going through, not that it was hard, but it was time consuming. I was going through and putting in the Q1 auto sum for each person. So very time consuming. Now, meanwhile, back at the pivot table, this is what I could do to retrieve that data as well. All I have to do is come over here and put a check mark in order amount. Here are my Q1 totals. So it automatically gave me the sum of the order amount without doing anything. All I did was I put a click or check mark in sum of order amount, and it gave me my figures automatically. I personally think that that is very cool. It's a very nice tool for you to use. Now, let's say that you're not interested in the salespeople, that you're interested in the regions. So I can take the check mark out of salesperson, put a check mark in region, and now it gives me the total sales for Q1 for the regions, for the East, North, South, and West. I can do the same thing for months. I can put a check mark in months, and it gives me January, February, March, and their totals for all the salespeople. Let's say that, let's just go ahead and put the salespeople back in. Let's say we're looking at the salespeople, but we want to see, okay, here's their total, but how did they do? Let's look at this. How did they do every month? So I can add in not only what they did for Q1, but then down below that, it's got their sales for January, February, and March. And all I'm doing is putting one little check mark in those fields, and it's retrieving this data for me instantaneously. Now, the one thing that I had to get used to when I started using pivot tables was that my eye would typically go, let's say that we're talking about Kathy Elberson, my eye would go down to the right, thinking that the 3,700 would be Kathy Albertson's total. Well, this is a little bit different. The sum of the order amount is directly across. The 3,700 is for Michael Brennan. So minor, right? Minor, that you can look at that, but you can also have those listed below. And you can arrange these differently. Right now I have month below salesperson. If I drag and drop that up above salesperson, it'll rearrange it. So it will give me January, February, and March, and break out the salespeople for each month. Just kind of depends on what you want to look at, but that is two different looks, depending on how they're ordered in there. Okay, just want to make sure there aren't any questions. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to take out the month because I want to talk about typically when you update data in a spreadsheet. And let's say that you have a corresponding chart, or you have a corresponding worksheet or workbook that it is connected to. You know that it will update automatically. The pivot table is a little bit different. So I'm going to go back over here to pivot table data, and I am going to come up to Kathy Albertson in C2. And I'm just going to type in like a large number, 9,000. You can see that these sales are not very high, but I'm going to put in a sale of 9,000, or overall sale of $9,000 for Kathy Albertson in January. When I come back over here to my pivot table, which is sheet 1, I'm just going to rename that. You'll note that Kathy Albertson it depends on what on the blank cells. Let me talk about that here in just a second. So if I come over, we'll test it. If I come over to Kathy Albertson, you'll note that $9,000 did not update in the pivot table. What you have to do is you have to come back over and you have to click on refresh, because the pivot table and the pivot table data do not talk to one another. Okay, one is static. The pivot table data is static, while the pivot table is dynamic. So those two don't talk to one another. If I click on refresh, now it updated Kathy's sales and the overall sales. Okay, going back to your question, I just want to make sure that I understand this. So if you have blanks, do you mean like if perhaps Kathy had no sales in February and March? Will that disrupt the pivot table? Is that answering your question? Okay, no, that will not. What potentially would disrupt is if you had lines in between. You definitely do not want to do that. You don't want to insert lines in between your salespeople. That could definitely disrupt what you're doing. But you can certainly have let's say that February and March, Kathy took those 2 months off. Or whatever the case may be, or just didn't sell anything. I don't know, but no, it will not disrupt it. Excellent question. Thank you very much. Here. Okay, now the other thing that I wanted to show you, and this is the benefit of putting in the pivot table data, or the table data array before you start. I'm going to come down here to A41. And I'm just going to put in Walters, Chris. Notice that when I typed in Walters, Chris, hit the tab key or went to cell B41, however you want to get there, it automatically updated my table. Okay. So Chris is in the south. Let's add in a $90,000 sale in March. All right. So now when I go back over to my pivot table, I do still have to click on refresh, and I'm going to do that here in a second. However, if this were not in a table, I would have to do two things. I would have to go to change data source. I'm just going to show you what this looks like. And it has Q1 data in here. If I scroll down, see it's including row 41. If I did not have this in a table, I would have to do two things. I would have to update my table data source, my change data source. Then I would have to refresh. So just a benefit of putting it in a table, one benefit of putting it in the table before you begin. All right. So I was saying that, I mean, I'm not sure that I've said this yet, but you can have multiple order amounts in the values. Okay. So if I pull this down again, let's say that I come down and I take order amount and I put it in there, it gives me sum of order amount 2. But I don't want it to, I don't need 2 that give me the sum. You can change that. And you can change that by clicking on the down arrow, highlighting value field settings, and it gives you this window. The custom name is sum of order amount. Down below, here are the calculations that a pivot table will automatically calculate for you. So you have sum, count, average, max, min, product, count numbers, standard deviation P, variance, and variance P. Okay, so I have 12 calculations. It depends on. So you cannot add functions to this list, but you can add functions. Okay, you can create your own, and we will be doing that. We might have time to do that today, but you can create your own calculations and save them, and they will be there in your version of Microsoft Excel for you to utilize. So let's just say that I want the average amount. So I have sum, now I want the average amount. When I put in the average amount, the average amount of order amount, that's not a very good description of what we are doing here. So I'm going to come up to custom name, and I'm just going to call this my Q1 average, or Q1 sales average. And I can change that name. If you need to change the number format, which we can, let's go ahead and do that. If you want to change the number format, it's currently currency 2 decimal places. We don't need those decimal places because there are no decimals. If you reduce the decimals, it will either round up or round down. And you know, this window should look very familiar to you. I'm just going to go ahead and click on OK. Click on OK again, and it gives me my Q1 average sales. Now I can go to B2 and change this to Q1 Q1 sales and change the name, the custom name there. But if I want to reduce the decimals, it might be easiest to come to value field settings and go to number format. And go to reduce, oops, not increase, reduce, well, let's backspace and hit 0 since I'm hitting the wrong. And okay, there we go. Now with the number format, you can do the old-fashioned way and go back to the home ribbon and go to the numbers group. You can right click and you can tell it that you want to number format. So there's different ways that you can do things. Again, it's whatever is you feel most comfortable with. So I have 2 in there now. I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to drag order amount down again. Again, it's going to default to sum of order amount. So you have to go in and make these changes. Value field settings. This time I'm going to take max. So we'll just rename this. Sale max. I'm going to go into my number format, reduce my decimal to 0. Say okay. Okay, so we have Q1 sales average, Q1 sale max. I'm going to bring this down there one more time. And we're going to change this one to the min. So Q1 minimum sale, and then I'm going to go to numbers format. I'm just going to reduce this decimal to 0 and okay. And you know, in a very short manner of time, I have my sales, my average, my max, and my minimum sale. Sorry, I like everything to be consistent. There we go. So you have those numbers there for you to utilize. Now, what I want to do is we're going to go in and we are going to create on the pivot table analyze. We're going to create a chart. However, if I go to create a chart right now, I can go up to pivot chart, but this is an awful lot to look at. So it's a lot to grasp. So I'm going to go ahead and click on cancel. And I really kind of want this information because if I want to chart just sales, I would have to delete the average, the max, and the min. So if I wanted to, I could click on the down arrow and remove the field, or I could drag and drop it out of this quadrant. But a better solution is going to be to duplicate the pivot table. So if you know that you are going to need multiple pivot tables before you even start working, I would replicate or duplicate the pivot table. All right. Now, how do you do that? There's a couple of ways that you can do that. And it's the same as replicating a worksheet. I can go ahead and right click. I can click on move or copy. I'm going to tell it that I want to move it to the end and create a copy and click on OK. And there's my table too. Now let's just kind of organize this and move this sheet over. That was quite a few steps in my personal opinion. So another way that you can do this as a keyboard shortcut is you can hover your mouse over the name of the worksheet that you want to replicate, and you can hold down the control key and just click and drag to the right and let up. And now I have pivot table 2, pivot table 3. I don't need all 3 of those. I'm just going to go ahead and right click and we'll delete one of those. Of course, it says, are you sure you want to delete this? Yes, I do. So let's come over here to pivot table 2, and we're just going to call this my pivot table chart. So we want to rename this chart data. All right. So in order to chart just my sales, I'm going to want to delete the average, the max, and the min. But when I remove these or delete these, it's only removing them from this pivot table, not the original one that we created. Okay, so I'm going to come down here and I'm just going to pull these out. See how that has a little X on it? And it's gone, and it's gone. Okay. So now I'm going to come up and I'm going to click on pivot chart. And in my pivot chart, it does not give you recommended, it'll give you recommended pivot tables, but not recommended pivot charts. So if you use recommended pivot charts in Microsoft Excel, it will not give you that guidance in the pivot tables. But if you are familiar with charts, you know that the most commonly used are column, line, pie, and bar. So I'm just going to come down here to my bar chart, and we will select that one. I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. Just like when you're inserting a chart in Microsoft Excel, the pivot table puts it right on top as well. I do not want that to be placed on top of my data. So I'm going to move to the design ribbon. I'm going to tell it that I want to move the chart to a new sheet, and I'm just going to call this my chart. So when I click on OK, we're now going to have 4 worksheets, 2 which are pivot tables, and a pivot chart, and just the pivot table data in my workbook. I'm going to come over, I'm just going to pull this over to the end. Just like when you're working in a normal chart, you can go to design, you can select the style that you would like. You can come over to chart element and tell it that you want maybe data labels. I'm going to go ahead and put data labels in. Now that I put the data labels in, I can clean this up a little bit. I don't necessarily need all this information. This horizontal axis is not doing me any good anymore. So I'm going to delete that. I already know that this is the total, so I can put in the total. And I can come up here and I can just rename my chart. My chart. I might want to make the font a little bit bigger so I can go back to my home ribbon. And if I want to change the font, I can change the font. If I want to increase the font, I can increase the font a little bit, make it a little bit easier for everybody to see. You know, with charts, I could keep going on and on and on because there's a lot that you can do with charts. The one thing I want to point out is this is what's a little bit different, is that right here where it says salesperson, look what I have. This allows me to sort from A to Z. I didn't do that. Maybe I have to go back. Oh, I know what it is. The pivot charts, and see how it's just the opposite, and there's a way to change that. I'll have to think about it. But there is a way to change that. At any rate, you can go from A to Z or Z to A, but you can also filter this information, which you cannot do in a regular chart. So if I come here to select all, and let's say that you're doing a live presentation and somebody says, well, let's take a look at Kathy Albertson and Chris Walters. So I can click on OK, and it'll take a second, but it just gives me those two people. All right. Now, again, I didn't delete the others. I filtered them out. If I go back to my pivot table chart data, see, it just has those two people. So these filters, this filter is working on both the pivot table and the pivot table chart. So if I come in here and say, I'm just going to clear that one, and we'll bring it all back. And let's say that I want Richard and Tia. So I can click on OK. There's Richard and Tia. I can go to my chart, and it will flip to Richard and Tia in my chart. All right. So if I did come over here to my pivot table data, and if I made another change, let's make a change to Michael. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to put in a $40,000 sale in January. In January. So when I go back to my pivot table, who did I make that to? Oh, Michael. Okay. So when I go to my pivot table, here's Michael. It does not represent that $40,000. If I go to pivot table analyze, I can click on refresh, or I can click on the down arrow and click on refresh all, and it will impact my pivot table chart data, and my chart. So I don't have to click on refresh on each one of the worksheets. I can say refresh all. There's the 43. Let's move on. Oops. Let's turn off that filter. Come on. There we go. And there's Michael's increase, and here's my chart. And there's Michael's increase. So you can see that refresh all went in and allowed me to update everything within this workbook by just clicking on refresh all. Okay, now I was talking earlier about setting up data correctly, and I have an example. I have an example of some data that someone sent me saying, I'm trying to create a pivot table out of this, and I don't understand why it won't work. And this really happened, which is why I think it is so important to show folks this. Now, this particular Excel workbook was generated from a separate database. So it was imported or exported from a database, and I don't remember what database it was, into Microsoft Excel. But this is the way that it came in. Okay, so we've got two different worksheets here. And this is what this poor person was trying to do, was trying to manually go in here and figure out exactly. So this was their summary page. You know, this is something that you do not want to do. But this was what the report that they were working with. So what you have here, and there's a lot of information. It took me a while to go through it and look at this and say, what on earth am I looking at? Because I didn't have any idea. And in essence, we don't need a lot of this data, and we can get rid of it because of the way that it imported into Microsoft Excel from the database. There's a lot of things that are wrong here. For instance, the course, which is what this person was trying to do, was trying to separate out the year, the year and the course name, and that is all in one name right here, and I'll explain what that means here in just a second. So we need to keep course. Some other things that that we need to keep are the actual, which was the attendance. So this is something else that you never want to do. This is all in one cell. Saturday from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. If you want to do any calculations with that, you need to have Saturday's irrelevant, but you need to have the 10 a.m. in one column and the 1 p.m. in another column if you need to calculate time. Kind of like this is the start time and the end time, so to speak. Let's see, there's one more that I do. I'm trying to think of what it is. I think maybe that's all we need. We can make this work. Now, the other thing that I want to point out was this is what she was doing. She was going in and inserting rows. We can't have those rows in there. And doing the individual, and then taking that number and putting it on this summary. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to get rid of a lot of these columns, because we can use the pivot table to calculate the number of people that attended these various classes, but we have to clean this up. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete these columns, and then I'm going to delete these columns. Okay, now the other thing that we need to do is we've got all these blank lines in here, and there are several hundreds of lines of data here. Let's just see if I can put down to the bottom here. And it's stopping me from using the control shift and the down arrow because of these line breaks. Oh, okay. So 272 lines, not terrible. But I'm not going to go through and delete these, you know, one at a time. What I'm going to do is I am going to put on here that I want to sort from A to Z. Then if I go to the bottom, here's all my blank lines. So that was a little bit of a faster way of deleting these. I don't need any of that. I'm just going to delete these. Okay, we'll go back up to the top. Now, the other thing that we need to do, what we're looking at here, is that this is the 1/8 represents 2018. the AP represents April. After that, the ANIM 051 is a class name. I don't have any idea what the class is, doesn't matter. What we need to do is take this data and put it into two different columns. And we can do that real easily. But what we need to do is first thing we need to do is we need to make room for this data. So we're going to go ahead and insert another column. And then, do I have another column over here? Oh, I do. My count. I do not need that. Let's just delete that. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and select from A2 down to A243. And I'm going to move from the home ribbon over to the data ribbon. And on the data ribbon, I'm going to use this text to columns. So on the text to columns, there's a couple of different ways that you can split out information. You have delimited and you have fixed width. The delimited, and which is not the one that we need to use, but I'm just going to go ahead and move over here, are delimitators, tabs, semicolons, commas, spaces. Or you can, if there's something else, you can put in your own. I'm going to go ahead and back up here because we want a fixed width. So I'm going to select fixed width and I'm going to click on next. And what I need to do is just to click very carefully, you can always move this, to insert a line in between the 1/8 AP, and so to separate the year and the month with the name of the course and the number. Okay, if you need to split out more than, if I need to split that out into more than 2 columns, I can do that, but we don't need to right now. So that's where I am going to do my split. When I click on next, it says, okay, here's where it's going to split. Where's the destination? The destination is A2 because I still want the year and the month in A2. So I can go ahead and click on finish. And here we have it. So this is the date, which you could split that out. That's what I was sitting here thinking about. You could split out the year and the month if you wanted to, but just as a quick demonstration, I'm going to leave it that way. And then this is the course, and this is the participants. I'm going to label these a little bit more clearly. Okay, so I should have made this bigger for you to see. I apologize for that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to insert. We're going to insert a table. It automatically selected the A1 to C243, applied the absolute reference. My table has headers, so I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And I'm just going to call this table data. Okay, so I have everything in a table. I'm going to move back to insert and back to pivot table and click on OK. Now, if I want to know the course, which there's a lot of courses to look at, and the participants, it will give me those totals automatically. And this is a lot of data to deal with. And but that's, when you're thinking about arranging data, if you are getting reports from a separate database, workforce, or Salesforce, whatever the case may be, you might have to clean this up a little bit in order for a pivot table to work. But once you understand how to clean it up, you saw how fast that went. And rather than trying to go through and manually calculate all of that or insert rows and go to that to that length. So if you're pulling reports or you're getting reports that don't look like they are conducive to utilizing a pivot table, maybe think about cleaning them up a little bit, and then you'll be able to do that. And again, you know, I could have put date in here. I just put date in here, and you can see that it's from April of 2018 to June of 2019, and then there's a that's really not a date, but anyway, you can look at it that way. So you can look at your data, you can gather it very quickly in order for you to analyze that data. Okay, I want to stop. We're just about out of time. Make sure that you see if you have any additional questions. I just want to double check here. Calendar. Yeah. There's the part one, part two. So next week we will definitely be doing those calculations that you can perform on your own. I have an example of that. If you would like me to email you the templates that I will be working with, feel free to send me an email at jduspace@gmail.com. I have no problem doing that. No, I did both. I put it in a table and then I put it in a pivot table. Otherwise, it would not look like this. We would not have these options. My table is on Daphne, and my pivot table is on sheet 1.
Hello.
Yes.
Since I have access to audio and a microphone, I figured this might be helpful. I was mainly just asking, like, since I don't think the question that I was getting at is very clear within the text that I sent. I was more so meaning as in when you have that large array and everything of, say, since I know this is MCC's list of classes and who's the participants over however many years and everything. When you were initially putting in that table, I had accidentally looked away from the screen and I didn't see pull up. See if I can. I'm going to don't want to care about. Just going to say team. Right here. If I can, I was going to kind of show what I was meaning with my own Excel. I was kind of recreating yours. I just sent you a request to be able to share my screen, just so I could more easily explain what I'm doing.
I didn't receive the request, but I can certainly allow you to do that. That's not a problem.
It says sharing is not turned on.
Oh, there it goes. It was just delayed.
Okay. All right. And see. Here we are. All right. I'm guessing you can see my Excel document right now.
I can indeed.
Awesome. So I'm gonna say J. And B. So I have an array here. I can go boom, boom. And so saying whether or not I use table or pivot table for this data. When we're,
So in order to make it more efficient in using the pivot table, you would first want to insert a table and then
just the regular table.
pivot table.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, you're welcome.
I saw both of them. I'm just like,
No,
how do
you're
I use this?
fine.
All right.
Other questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anytime. Yeah, and that's why it would have been, you trying to replicate it is, you know, that's time consuming. So, going forward, if you do want it, or I can, ask Joshua at the New Space to give me the participants, email addresses as well, but you can always email me, and I saw that Benjamin, you have it, my email address at jdnewspace@gmail.com. So I can share out the templates with you and you can work along with me. Like Benjamin just demonstrated, you do have video and audio capabilities. So if you want to work along with me, if you have specific questions, we can stop, you can share your screen. I am completely open to that. I actually prefer that rather than just being a talking head for an hour. If you could get some hands-on opportunities, I think that is extremely beneficial to everyone involved. All right. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I hope that you have a lovely afternoon and a fabulous weekend. As always, big shout out to the Do Space for everything that they do for the greater Omaha area. Check out their calendar. They've got a lot going on. It's not only fun to facilitate the webinars, but it's also fun to participate. So thanks, everybody, and I hope to see you next week.
Thank you very much, Julie.
Thank you.